Welcome to Bagels Bible Study and Brotherhood, where we're going to look at Acts 12. My teaser for the week that I sent out is shown here. Let me give you full screen. And this just reinforces the law of unintended consequences. So, let's read Acts 12, 1 through 11. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this met with the approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying for him. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and the sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and the light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Get up," he said, and the chains fell off of Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and sandals," and Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, and he had no idea what the angel was doing was really happening, though he thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and the second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. And when they walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. Then Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel to rescue me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen." Well, in Acts 12:1, it says, it was about this time that King Herod arrested some of the people who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. Which Herod? Which Herod is he talking about? I want to give you a caution. When you look at things on the web, you'll find a lot of unreliable material. In one of them, as an example, it said there are only 2 Herods in the Bible. Well, that's not quite true. There are at least 4. It kind of depends on how you count them, but there were 4. And one of them said that vanity was the characteristic of Herod the Great, but not his son. Baloney. He went on to say this part of the Bible needs correcting. It wasn't Herod Antipas that was eaten by worms, and he wanted to move the passage in Acts 12 to Acts 2. Well, what chutzpah to think that he could correct the holy word of God. And then why is any of this important? Well, context. I want you to understand that these are real people living in real times with many of the same anxieties and problems that we face today. The story of Jesus is not a fairy tale. It's real. It's a story told in a moment in history. And history does matter. Now, one has to be very careful when reading these names, and the ancients loved to repeat names. So I have a handout, hopefully will be made available online, and this is taken from Pastor Glenn's weblog, and I think it's very nice because it includes in it many of the biblical references to which Herod we're talking about. So for fun, let's start with some sex. Let's start with a sexy story. Salome danced for the head of John the Baptist. We all know this story. But this family tree is not sufficient, so we're going to look at another one. And here's Salome. You can see her in the red square. She is Herodias' daughter. Herodias, you can see, is the granddaughter of Herod the Great. Herodias is the granddaughter of Miriam the First. She's a descendant of the Maccabees. That's important. Remember, the Maccabees threw out Antiochus Epiphanes from the temple and cleansed the temple. They were very important about 150 years before this time in liberating Israel from the oppression of the Antiochus. And it was this kind of lineage that gave Herod the street creds that he wanted for being a Jew and made him tolerable to the people. Now, Herodias was the daughter of Aristobulus, and Aristobulus and Herodias were known for their good looks. They were really good looking. I'm sorry, I should have said Miriam and Aristobulus. Miriam and Aristobulus were very good looking. We can assume that Salome was also good looking because of how she enticed Herod Antipas. Well, let's get back to the story. Herod Philip the First, he's in the next slide. He's the son of Herod the Great by Miriam the Second, and she's the daughter of Simon the high priest. So he has another linkage to the Jewish aristocracy, giving him more street creds. But Philip was not a ruler. I like to use mnemonics, and so I know him as Phil's first husband, and I'll tell you why. Notice that there's no star underneath him. He was not a ruler. The stars represent rulers, and the red stars had limited empires, and the blue stars had the whole ball of wax. We'll talk about that a little bit. But Philip the First was the father of Salome, and Herod Philip the First was the husband of Herodias. Well, when Philip the First and Herod Antipas got together, there seemed to be a little hanky-panky going on, and Herod Antipas wanted to divorce his wife, and Philip did divorce Herodias, and she married Antipas, and this was a real problem. Herod Antipas, my slang name for him is Antsy Pants. Old Antsy Pants was the son of Herod the Great by Malthus, who was a Samaritan, and you know the Samaritans were not well thought of back then. Here's Herod Antipas that we're talking about. He wasn't well thought of, and he had been made a tetrarch, a ruler of a quarter. When Herod the Great died, he had a will, and it was approved by the emperor, and his empire was divided, and the portion that went to Antipas was the area of Galilee and Perea. Let me show you here just a little image of Antipas. This is a painting by Tissot, and this is the territory that he ruled. Antipas has I guess it's purple colored. Notice it's a divided empire, and the southern border rests on Nabatea. And a little like Solomon, he married a foreign wife to bring peace between the two nations, or ensure peace. So he married Pharsalus, the daughter of King Aretes, who was the king of Nabatean Arabia. Well, when Antipas got Philip I to divorce Herodias, Antipas then divorced his wife Pharsalus, the daughter of King Aretes, and that really ticked off the king. He married Herodias, and King Aretes was so infuriated over this shameless treating of his daughter that he declared war on Herod Antipas, and Aretas defeated Antipas's army and would have killed Antipas, but Tiberius ordered a counteroffensive, and unfortunately for him, Antipas, Tiberius died in 37, and the battle was never totally settled. Philip I died without sons and really wasn't heard from after that. The famous person that comes out of this story, of course, is John the Baptist, and he publicly condemned the fact that Herodias was divorced by Philip I and married by old Lancy Pants, Herod Antipas. Because in Leviticus 18:16 it says, do not have sexual relations with your brother's wife. That would dishonor your brother. And Leviticus 20:21 it says, if a man marries his brother's wife, it's an act of impurity. He has dishonored his brother. They will be childless. Well, when you're willing to say the Bible says, there are going to be consequences. And some of them may not be pleasant. And John the Baptist had his head chopped off. You can see in this painting by Caravaggio, Salome, who's actually quite beautiful, holding John the Baptist's head, and that's probably Herodias looking on. Well, in the New Testament, Jesus and Herod Antipas have encounters. First of all, in Luke 13:32, Jesus refers to Antipas as that fox. Now, back then, the fox didn't have the reputation it does now of being a schemer, sly animal. Back then, it was just an unclean, lesser animal, and so you could have been calling him anything you wanted. A dog, a badger. He just was not a pleasant person. And later, Herod Antipas is the one who tried Jesus, and that's in Luke 23:7. Now, let's go back to the, the family tree, and we have Antipater. The word pater is father, and so he's anti-father, and that worked out that way. He held no office. There's no star under his name. And as Herod the Great was dying, Herod the Great peeled an apple. He considered at that time turning the knife on himself. Well, when Antipater heard about that, he was delighted, and he even tried to get a guard to dispatch Herod the Great with a knife. But the guard told Herod the Great, and 5 days before Herod's death, he had his son killed and buried ignobly. And we have Josephus's writings to know that. Now, there's Herod Philip II, and he was a ruler. Perhaps for us, the most famous thing he did was he founded Caesarea Philippi. Looks like he named it after himself. Very humble, I'm sure. That was a place where they worshipped idols, and they had wanton sex and drinking. Jesus took his disciples there, which was truly remarkable for Orthodox Jews to go to such a place of idolatry. But he had a purpose, and at that place, Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Philip II was the son of Herod the Great and Cleopatra of Jerusalem, and he ruled Eritrea and Trachonitis, and you can see he was kind of up in the boondocks, up there to the east of the Sea of Galilee, and so he didn't have the pressure of all the court stuff going on around Jerusalem. And, in the New Testament, he's called Philip. They didn't say Herod Philip, but that was his name. And it's in Luke 3:1, where they give a list of people to set the time and history of that writing. Now, another important member of the family is Archelaus. I call him Archelaus because he was a louse. He was an ethnarch, had only a portion of the empire, and he was a son of Malthrace, a Samaritan, and a brother of Herod Antipas or Antipas. And when Jesus was born, it was dangerous there. They killed all the children under 2 years of age in Nazareth, so they fled to Egypt. And some people speculate that the gold, frankincense, and myrrh that the family got helped support their exile. And they returned. And in Matthew 2:22 it says, "But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there, having been warned in a dream, and he withdrew to the district of Galilee." And so this man was a ruler of Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. And you can see that in the green, very large area, and around Jerusalem. The problem that you run into is that he was such a bad person that he ultimately got called back by the emperor and lost his empire in Israel. Now the next Herod, and this is the central central person of our story, is Herod Agrippa the First, and I call him Agrippa Tummy. Because he's going to need to grip his tummy pretty soon. He's the son of Aristobulus, who was very handsome and like his mother. Call him the dead looker because he was killed by Herod the Great. And Herod Agrippa was a grandson of Herod the Great. Well, since Aristobulus was executed in 7 BC, Agrippa was only about 3 years old. And he was a descendant of the Maccabees. So he was sent to Rome at age 11 to be educated, and as such in the court he became friends or buddies with Caligula. Caligula was, the name means little boots. He was a mascot that the soldiers called Little Boots when they would go off to battles in Gaul. He was there with his family, and he just slowly went nuts and became a very bad person. And there was Claudius, who was a stutterer. People kind of discounted him. They thought he was stupid because he was a stutterer, but he wasn't. Anyway, old Agrippa, or Agrippa Tummy, he in Rome he went bankrupt, and so he fled his creditors in the early 30s, and he went to the Holy Land and was an official in Galilee's capital under Tiberius. And then he fell out of favor with his uncle Antipas, and so he fled to Antioch. Remember Antipas up there who married Herodias? They didn't get along. So he fled to Antioch, and he quarreled with the Roman governor there, so he went to Alexandria, and a rich man gave his wife money so they could go back to Rome. So you got, notice the pattern here. He goes here, gets kicked out. He goes there, gets kicked out. So probably in Alexandria they paid money to get rid of him, and he went back to Rome. And he looked for financial help with Caligula, but Caligula really couldn't help him until he had power. And so he encouraged Caligula to seize power. And Tiberius imprisoned Agrippa in the autumn of 36. And then Tiberius died in about 37, and Caligula became the emperor. So Caligula freed him, and he made him a king. This is the first king of Israel since his grandfather, Herod the Great. That had been about 40 years. And Agrippa stayed in Rome, and he was a friend of the emperor. He had a good deal going there. Well, in 39, his uncle Antipas, I should have shown this earlier. You can see we had Tiberius, who followed Caesar Augustus or Octavian, and then Caligula was killed. Claudius was probably poisoned, and Nero was, I believe, committed suicide. Not good emperors at all. And here we have, just to highlight, Antipas and Agrippa the First. And what happened was that Herod Antipas wanted to get Agrippa's title. And remember that earlier in the story, Antipas, when they had kind of had this tiff, Agrippa fled to Antioch to get away from him. So they were not friends at all. And Agrippa then accused Antipas to Caligula for having committed treason. Remember that Agrippa was pals with Caligula, so Caligula, of course, would side with Agrippa, and Antipas, Antipas, got kicked out of his empire and was exiled to Gaul. And Herodias went with them. They both went off to Gaul, which is, like going to the frontier. And as a result, Galilee and Perea were given to Agrippa, and that increased his empire. Well, by 41, Caligula was acting pretty insane, and the palace guard killed him. And they made Claudius the emperor, and Agrippa helped out in the ascension to the throne, and so Claudius was grateful to him, and he added Judea and Samaria to Agrippa's realm. Now, at this point, all of the territories once ruled by Herod the Great now are ruled by Herod Agrippa. He's gets a blue star, just like Herod the Great in that outline. And Agrippa then returns in triumph to Jerusalem. And he's a Hellenistic Roman Jew. He's got all bases covered. He completes the aqueduct to the temple that was started by Herod the Great and continued under Pontius Pilate. It was controversial under Pontius Pilate's tenure. The Talmudists had a very positive view of Agrippa's reign. They normally would read the scroll on the first day of Sukkot, and they would have a wooden dais sit up on the temple steps. And as they read from the Torah scroll, the king would sit there. Well, Agrippa I stood and read to the delight of the priests. And when he reached the commandment in Deuteronomy 17:15, it says, "You may not put a foreigner over you as a king. You may not put a foreigner over you as a king." His eyes ran with tears. And the priest said, "Don't fear, Agrippa, you're our brother, you're our brother." What toadies. And what an actor he was. He was a real politician. He knew how to be popular and manipulate the people. And as a result, he realized, he could increase his popularity by arresting an apostle. So he did. He arrested Apostle James, the brother of John, both sons of Zebedee. And he was killed with a sword. James was. So likely he was beheaded. And we should remember at this point that persecution often accompanies progress in the church. Well, it seemed to go over pretty well with the people, so he arrested the Apostle Peter, and likely he was going to kill him after the holy days. The Feast of Unleavened Bread was on. That was right at Passover, and it was not right to kill somebody at that time. So during this Passover, I think that means it's been about a year since Jesus died. And Jerusalem's going to be swollen with people. Now, let's just look back a little bit. What's happened in the last year? Stephen was martyred in Saul's presence. Philip baptizes the Ethiopian eunuch. And next thing you know, he's in Caesarea. Saul has a vision on the road to Damascus, and he was going there to capture and kill Christians, and now he's become a Christian. And disciples have gone to Samaria of all places, hated people. They were like half-Jews and disliked. Peter then took up residence with an unclean person, Simon the tanner. And Peter goes to Caesarea, where he witnesses the Holy Spirit fill the hearts of Gentiles. Amazing. The church was growing, and it was including the outcasts, the Gentiles, the Samaritans. Well, in this setting, Herod Agrippa planned to kill Peter at the end of the feast. And during the feast, if he did it, it would backfire. So he knew of the previous escape of Peter, and so to make sure that Peter would be there, he had 4 guards simultaneously taking custody of Peter, and they would switch every 3 hours, and one would be fastened to the right hand, one to the left hand, and then 2 at the door. So humanly, it was not possible for Peter to escape. But escape he did with an angel of the Lord. What's interesting is everybody was praying for him. Well, probably they prayed for James, and he was killed anyway. We don't know whether they did or not. Maybe it happened so suddenly they couldn't. But William Temple said that when I pray, coincidences happen, and when I do not, they don't. Well, an angel miraculously releases Peter from prison, and in 11, Peter says, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches." See, he thought before maybe he was having a vision or a dream. And he certainly now has plenty of reason to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. No doubt remained. Okay, now we're going to read Acts 12:12 to 19a. That's the first verse, or the first half of that verse, I should say. Excuse me. So when this had dawned on him, and he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Peter knocked at the outer entrance, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. And when she recognized Peter's voice, she was overjoyed that she ran around without opening and exclaimed, "Peter's at the door." "You're out of your mind," they told her. And when she kept insisting that it was so, they said it must be an angel. But Peter kept knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet and described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. "Tell James and the other brothers and sisters about this," he said, and then left for another place. In the morning there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to I lost my place. As to what had become of Peter. After Herod had thorough search made for him and did not find him, he cross-examined the guards and ordered that they be executed. Well, it's almost a comical scene that we're given here. Peter's knocking at the door, trying to get in. Rhoda recognizes him. She's so excited she doesn't even open the door. They run around. Nobody believes it. They're praying, and they don't believe that the prayers will be answered. And when they're answered, they're astonished, absolutely astonished. How are we surprised when our prayers are answered? And what does this say about our understanding of who God is? Well, Peter then asks them to inform James. James is the oldest surviving brother. He's a stepbrother of Jesus, a half-brother. And as being the oldest, he was a statutory leader of the family. And so he earned respect. He later became the bishop of Jerusalem, and he wrote the book James in our Bible. Remember that he wasn't a supporter when Jesus was alive, but he had a vision after the death. In 1 Corinthians 15:7, it describes that. And so the change in James was another example of the power of the cross to change lives. Well, Peter goes to another place for his safety. We don't know where he went. The place is unknown. Now, the 16 guards were executed, and that was the custom of the time. You got the sentence that was for the person that you held in custody, and so they were executed. And we always need to be careful about our prayers, because when they prayed for the release of Peter, they were essentially praying for the death of the guards. Unintended consequences can be a problem, and so we should also include in our prayers that there be justice and mercy. Well, Acts 12:19b to 25, and I think this will end the chapter. And that was for the death of the guards. Then Herod went from Judah to Caesarea and stayed there. He'd been quarreling with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they now joined together and sought an audience with him. After securing the support of Blastus, a trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, sat on the throne and delivered a public address to the people. They shouted, "This is the voice of a God, not a man." And immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms, and he died. But the word of the Lord continued to spread and flourish. When Barnabas and Saul had finished their mission, they returned from Jerusalem. taking with them John, also called Mark. Well, Tyre and Sidon needed Jerusalem and the people of Israel to have open trade with them. Doesn't really say exactly why, but it's not unusual to need trading partners. And the commentary, at least one, suggests that this may have been about a year later from the release of Peter. And in verse 20 it said, with the support of Blastus, and I think that's a euphemism, meaning a sufficient bribe had been paid through Blastus to Agrippa, and now they could have that negotiation that they all wanted. That was the way things worked back in those days. And so now Herod is going to have an audience with the people, and likely he went to the amphitheater. We know some of what happened because of Josephus's writings. The foreigner schmoozed with him by saying, "This is the voice of a god." But the important thing here is that Herod Agrippa I should have torn his robes. That would have been the appropriate response for blasphemy. He knew he was not a god. He tried to deflect it, but his robes that day had silver threads in them. What the people were seeing was such a bright, sparkly outfit when the sun hit it that they were giving him the highest compliment. And he most likely thought, I'm not tearing these robes. These things cost me a lot of money. But if you really believe that God is God, then you can't support that kind of blasphemy. Religion was more politics to him than spiritual commitment. And likely, I think that Agrippa had a big belly. And I'm showing you these pictures because when you look at it, you think, well, they got a beer belly. But the two little boys there each have a condition called ascariasis, or they have roundworms in their bellies. And if you get enough, like the man up above, it can really be a problem, and you can be struck dead by them. And we know that Agrippa was struck dead and eaten by worms, and he died in 44 AD. Let me tell you what Josephus says. He said, now when Agrippa reigned 3 years over all Judea, he came to Caesarea, and there he exhibited shows in honor of the emperor. On the second day of the festival, Herod put on a garment made totally of silver and of truly wonderful contexture, and came into the theater early in the morning, at which time the silver on his garment was illuminated by the fresh reflection of the sun's rays on it. It shone after a surprising manner, was so resplendent as to thread a horror over the house that looked intently on him. At that moment, the flatterers cried out that he was a god, and they added, Be thou merciful to us, for although we have hitherto reverenced thee only as a man, yet shall we henceforth own thee as superior to mortal man. Upon this the king did neither rebuke them nor reject their impious flattery. A severe pain rose in his belly and began a most violent manner. His pain became violent, and accordingly he was carried into the palace, and the rumor went about that he would certainly die in a little time. And when he had been quite worn out by the pain in his belly for 5 days, he departed this life in the 54th year of his age and the 7th year of his reign. Now that comes from Josephus in the Jewish Antiquities. And as I said, I think Herod had ascariasis, or roundworms, and that's why I call him Agrippa tummy. Now I'm going to show you some pictures here, and if you have a weak stomach, you might want to skip over this. I'm warning you with this slide. But it's important to know that roundworms start as a hand-to-mouth entry into the body, where the eggs go into the intestines, and they invade the mucosa. They're carried to the lungs. They ascend to the throat. They're swallowed. These are the larvae. They're swallowed. They return then to the intestine, where they develop into adults. And they can live there for 1 to 2 years and get to the length of 12 to 13 inches. Each worm can lay 200,000 eggs a day. They're defecated, and then the cycle is returned. Well, when these little larvae go from the stomach to the lungs, they can cause damage. They can clog air spaces, and it can be fatal. Also, if they're so prolific, if you've got so many of them, you get this distended belly like I showed you. It can eat through the intestines into the outer areas of the stomach, the peritoneum, and it can cause peritonitis, which certainly will cause death. So the picture I'm going to show you, this boy has been anesthetized, and when the person dies or is totally immobile, then the worms will seek to exit the body any way they can. In this picture by Tom Nutman, I don't know how many people had that many worms in them, but I've seen large quantities that have been harvested from people. And it's believed that about 25% of the people in the world carry roundworms. Well, after Herod Agrippa Tummy died, he was succeeded by Herod Agrippa II. And I call him Two-Paul. The reason is that he is the one who examines Paul, and Felix and the husband of Drusilla become involved in this inquiry into Paul's beliefs as well. Bernice is a mistress of Titus, the emperor. Some people have said that she may have also had incest with Agrippa too, and we'll run into him a little further on in the story in Acts. So this ends the lesson. I have a postscript that some people might be interested in, and the question is, what do we know about the death of Herod the Great? He acted insanely when he was dying. I told you that he executed his son Antipater 5 days before he died. He also, in his lifetime, executed Miriam. If you look at this, what do you call it, family tree, you see over here, there's Miriam. These arrows show people that were killed by Herod the Great. She was his favorite wife, and he had her killed because he thought she was committing treason. Same with Alexander, and same with Aristobulus. So it was dangerous. In fact, someone said it's more healthy to be a pig in Israel than it is to be a relative of Herod the Great. In any case, he was not a very good person, and there's been a mystery as to how he died. Jan Hirschman is a physician at the University of Washington, attended a conference on where they take a famous person each year and they try to figure out what really caused their death. And probably he died of chronic kidney disease because he complained of itching and he had swelling of his feet. Probably also the deciding factor was a very nasty case of gangrene, Fourier's gangrene. Now let's go to Josephus because he gives us the most clues. And Josephus says his entrails were also ulcerated, and the chief violence of his pain lay in his colon. Now, I want to show you another gross picture if you're ready for it. The chief violence of his pain lay in his colon, and his privy member was putrefied and produced worms, probably maggots. And when he sat upright, he had difficulty breathing, which was very loathsome. And on account of the stench of his breath and the quickness of his returns, that is, defecation, or he had diarrhea, he also had convulsions in all parts of his body, that is, seizures, and they increased in strength to an insufferable degree. So not only was he a little nuts, he was pretty miserable at the end. Let me just repeat, the reason I bring you this gross stuff and these peccadillos and that sort of thing is these were the people that were ruling in the time of Jesus, the beginning and the end and the development of Christianity as it spread through the world. These were the people that lived then, and they're not a whole lot different than the people that live now. So I hope that this lesson has been useful, and may God bless you. Bye-bye.